Philadelphia is a very historical city. It is well known for all of the history it holds, some of its good history and some of its bad history. Some of its extremely bad history that we would all love to forget about. Today, in my podcast, we're going to be taking a look at the dark side of Philadelphia's history. Here are some of Philadelphia's most famous criminals who were imprisoned here. Al Capone is probably the most famous person who has been imprisoned in the jails of Philadelphia. Capone was born in the year 1899. After the 6th grade, he dropped out of school and became involved with the street gang. At around 1920, Capone became an influential lieutenant of the Chicago mob. In 1925, the leader of the mob, Johnny Torrio, became seriously wounded when he attempted to assassinate someone. On February 14, 1929, Valentine's Day as a matter of fact, the Bugs Morons mob were slaughtered. Capone's mob was held responsible for this, even though Al Capone himself was in Florida at the time. This day is also known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. On May 17th of 1929, Capone was imprisoned in the Eastern State Penitentiary. He stayed here for 8 months. His cell was rather nice compared to the others. The things inside his cell included things like lamps, rugs, paintings, a bed, cabinets, and even a radio. Al Capone died of cardiac arrest on January 25th of 1947. William Sutton, or Willie the Actor, is one of the most famous bank robbers in the world. Most of his work took place here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, actually. William Sutton was born on June 30th, 1901 in Brooklyn, New York. He was well known for his techniques. Willie has robbed many banks, and by many banks, I mean like a lot of banks. He had stolen at least $2 million in his career. He found this extremely easy to do. He robbed banks by disguising himself, and that's how he got his name of Willie the Actor. These disguises included security guard costumes, a window cleaner costume, messenger costumes, policeman costumes, and a diplomat outfit. From the time he was a teenager to the time he was an elder, he had always been a veteran thief and hoodlum. He spent 11 years at the Eastern State Penitentiary. In 1944, Willie broke out with 11 other inmates through a man-made tunnel. The tunnel was at least 100 feet underground. He remained free on the streets for a while. This was until he was captured by the police in 1952. He died on November 2nd, 1980. Now we're coming closer to the present. Gary Heidnik was a very interesting man. Born on November 23rd, 1943, he had kidnapped, tortured, and even raped 6 women in his Philadelphia apartment. Not only this, but he was also convicted for 2 counts of first-degree murder. This case was rather disturbing, in my opinion. He tried to act as if he was part of the movie The Silence of the Lambs, which was directed by Jonathan Demme. He acted as if he was part of the movie by keeping his girls prisoner in a well-like area in his basement, sort of like the killer did in the movie, if you've seen it. He kept these girls in the hole in his basement for 4 months as he tortured and raped them continuously. Eventually, over time, he murdered 2 of the 6 kidnapped women. The women he had murdered's names were Sandra Lindsay and Deborah Dudley. He was quickly taken to a Philadelphia prison from there. During his trial after the imprisonment, the surviving women explained that after Heidnik had killed the 2 women, he then began to dismember their body parts one by one, cook the parts, mix them with the dog food he had in the house, and then proceeded to feed the cooked body parts to the other women. Nice. He was then put on death row. Surprisingly, he wanted death row. He never denied his innocence. He told the police that he had believed that killing an innocent man like him on death row may end the death row system as a whole. The police didn't buy it, and overall, they didn't really care either. Gary Heidnik was escorted from a regular Philadelphia jail cell to a death row jail cell very quickly. He was executed by lethal injection on July 6, 1999. I guess you could say he got what he deserved. After doing what he did to those women, it's a good thing. Now let's move over to mob boss Nicodemo Scarfo, otherwise known as Little Nicky. Little Nicky was born on March 8, 1929 in Brooklyn, New York. In his early years before his life of crime, he aspired to be a boxer, although he failed. His uncle, Nicholas Piccolo, otherwise known as the Nicky Buck, was an influential mob leader. He hired Nicodemo to work for him and the rest of his mob as a bookmaker, which occurred in the late 50s. His first time majorly breaking the law was in the year of 1963. Within a Philadelphia restaurant, he got in a violent fight with another man. When the police arrived at the scene to break up the fight, they had found that he had stabbed the man to death with a knife that belonged to the restaurant. Soon after he killed him, Nicodemo and all of the other members quickly fled the scene. But later, Nicodemo was caught and was guilty of manslaughter. He served time less than a year in Philadelphia prisons. After spending time in Philadelphia, he then continued his life of crime and involvement with the mob group he had been in. The next person I will be discussing is one of the most disturbing people on this list, in my opinion. Dr. Kermit Gosnell was born on February 9th, 1941. He was an abortionist in his time. He opened up his very own abortion clinic called the Women's Medical Society in West Philadelphia. This abortion clinic stayed open for about 3 decades, although the clinic got terrible reviews from the people that went there for appointments. It was reported that the providers were not certified, some patients were neglected any treatment, and even random cats were just allowed to roam around the clinic and relieve themselves wherever they pleased, and Gosnell had no problem with it. When the clinic was inspected in August of 2010, the Philadelphia District of Attorneys said that when they got there, the walls appeared to have urine stains splattered all over them. Kermit Gosnell was doing what any abortionist is supposed to do, which is aborting babies, but he did it in a very odd and depressing way. To be honest, I really don't want to go too into detail about how he aborted the babies, but I'll try to keep it as censored as possible. But basically, he would take a pair of scissors, cut open the back of the baby's neck, and then proceed to cut their spinal cord. He was legitimately murdering these infants. He was not aborting these infants whatsoever. He was murdering them. Not only this, but some of the patients' regular doctors reported that their patients had been infected with STDs, which stands for sexual transmitted diseases. This had apparently happened while they were being treated at his clinic. Not only this, but a patient was even murdered during his procedures. Karnamaya Monger was killed as he did his doing, so that is technically murder in my eyes. This is when the police took action and investigated his clinic and everything he was doing in his clinic. He was then sentenced for life in prison without parole. Next up is Alton Coles. Alton Coles received a life sentence when the authorities found out that he was running a multi-million-dollar drug empire. The reason this was such a big news is because he transported drugs throughout different states. It was not only Pennsylvania. He is currently serving a life sentence in prison. His drug enterprise was active from 1998 to 2005. Alton Coles, otherwise known as Ace Capone, was using his record company as an area for drug trafficking. When the police raided his New Jersey home, they found 10 guns, 450 grams of cocaine, and finally $500,000 in cash. During his trial, when they agreed that he will be serving the rest of his life in prison, he broke down in tears. Alton exclaimed that he never thought it would come to this, and he did not think that life is deserved for selling drugs. The police stated that his associate, Ricky Durham, could be possibly facing a 30-year sentence and a possible $1,500,000 fine. They are both currently in Philadelphia prison for the rest of their lives. Now we have come to the last person I would like to talk about. The final person on this podcast we will be discussing is Matthew Clemens, also known as Pukemon. Unlike the others, this case may seem rather humorous to some of you, as a matter of fact. At a Phillies game in April of 2010, Matthew Clemens forced himself to vomit on an innocent father and daughter. The father turned around right away and punched him straight in the face. And the father of the 11-year-old girl just so happened to be an off-duty police officer. Matt was arrested and served 3 months in prison in Philadelphia. Not only this, but he also had to do 50 hours of community service, which took place at Citizens Bank Park. He was forced to clean up trash and scrub the toilets. later at around 2013, he was diagnosed with anemia. He was severely ill and had to go to the hospital for this multiple times. On June 10th of 2014, he died of anemia. Well, all the people on this list have done really terrible things. But in the end, I guess we can all say that they most definitely got what they deserved. I really hope you enjoyed listening to my podcast about famous criminals who were imprisoned in our city.